different social classes in different continents. That's what we're talking about. So what we need to do is actually look at the way that men act with impunity in every social class and usually get away with sex crimes. Just one quick mention, and don't normally speak in statistics because I think people shut their eyes, but this is a really shocking statistic that comes from England and Wales about our conviction rate for rape. Of the tiny minority of rapes and sexual assaults that actually are reported by brave victims, like Virginia, only 1% of the cases that are reported end in a conviction in England and Wales. So either 99% of women and girls are lying, or we have a whole lot of rapists walking around.
Well, again, I'm going to just include that caveat that Prince Andrew has consistently and persistently maintained his innocence in this regard. The allegations against him will not be contested, proven or disproven in a criminal court. It's worth labouring the point too, this was not a criminal case brought against him. It was a civil claim that ultimately would have resulted in damages. And in a sense, there will be those who will argue that there is money crossing the table. It's just crossing the table rather sooner than it might have happened. Let's go back, if we can, to Di Davis, a royal watcher who's, you know, like many of us, I suppose, as a former royal correspondent myself, Di, watched the travails of the royal family from afar with interest. And I have to say, those people, and I'm just going to separate this into Prince Andrew, the man, as people have experienced his personality. I don't think it's controversial, tendentious for me to suggest to you and to our viewers that he's not a popular man. Even setting all this stuff aside, he's got a reputation for being supercilious and slightly pompous.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. As I said, in the court of public opinion, I don't think there'll be many worried about what he has or hasn't done in one sense. The fact now a settlement has been reached is good in one sense because it puts matters to rest. However, as always, it leaves as many questions now unanswered. As you say, it wasn't tested in any kind of court. I wish in one sense it had. But equally so, it has spared the royal family the undoubted publicity that would have followed this case throughout this period when we're meant to be celebrating Her Majesty's Jubilee. So I'm pleased for the royal family as a whole. I'm pleased also, as your other correspondent has said, for women generally. You know, this is an important issue. She has touched on it. I agree with virtually every word she says. And there's something chronically wrong with our justice system that allows men to get away the way they have been and are being in our courts. Something is fundamentally wrong, one, with the investigations, and secondly, with the whole process in the criminal courts. Something has to change. And if this allegation against Prince Andrew helps highlight that in any way, I'd be for it.
Stay with us. There is a response from the Duke of York's office, albeit it's a sort of non-response in a sense. Di Davis, we'll come back to you in a second. Representatives for the Duke of York said he would not be expanding beyond the statement filed in court. When asked for comment by our friends at PA News, Virginia Giuffre's lawyer, David Wise, said, "I believe this event speaks for itself." If you are just tuning in, let me just recap what we're hearing, that there will not now be what would have been a hugely embarrassing trial, civil case in America, with all the disclosure that an American trial involves, a hugely embarrassing event for the royal family, and in particular and specifically for Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, in contesting those civil case sex allegations against him. We'll go through the statement again that's just been issued on behalf of the court, and I'll go through it with Julie Bindle, a women's rights campaigner who just happens to be, as it turns out, our 2-hour-long guest today, and you've chosen the right right moment, in a sense, to be with us, because I know this is a story that is very close to your heart. Money going to a charity, and beyond that, they'll not say very much, because that's the way this game works. Once you do the out-of-court settlement, your lips are not entirely sealed, but they sort of are.
Well, what we can speculate on, and this is just generally in terms of libel proceedings, is that when you actually exchange evidence, so you obviously put your case, you put your statement of case, and then the other side, the person being accused of defamation, would put their defence forward. And lawyers will then look at whether or not there is a way to mediate and reach a settlement. And what we can extrapolate, excuse me, from any case where there is a settlement is that the person being accused, so in other words, not the person bringing the case, but the person having to defend themselves, obviously doesn't want a trial. Now, there are various reasons why you might not want a libel trial. The expense is horrendous. I don't think that barrier would be in the way of anyone as wealthy as Prince Andrew. But there are other issues, of course, that you want to avoid, which is evidence coming out. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting, because we do not know whether or not the allegations against Prince Andrew of direct sexual abuse are founded or unfounded. But what we do know is that there was a friendship with Epstein, and there were various other times that the men would have been together that others will know about. And I think that there's something that is desperately, that Prince Andrew will want to keep hidden. So we're talking way broader than the direct allegations. We're now talking about how Virginia's evidence would be extremely embarrassing and might be actually more than embarrassing, but might be damning. And of course, there's no barrier to taking a criminal case against any person if they haven't already been acquitted.
Again, for obvious reasons, I don't want to get into specifics there, but I think our viewers will appreciate the broad principle that once you enter into a legal process, you lose control of that process.
That's right.
Regardless of which side of the defence prosecution side of the barrier you're on, it's in the gift of the judge, and if the judge decides that the trial will go in a given direction. Let's just, Julie, pause there for a second, because there will be people just turning on who haven't got really the faintest clue precisely what it is we're talking about. And it is, in fact, let me talk to Michael Cole, formerly BBC royal correspondent, and also a spokesman for Mohammed Al Fayed as well, if memory serves. Michael Cole, thanks so much for joining us. I was just explaining to our viewers that this has been settled out of court, the Giuffre Prince Andrew case, the civil sex case that was a real sword of Damocles hanging over the royal family, and specifically Prince Andrew. There will be those people who are not remotely surprised, who always saw this coming. Did you?
Well, in America, almost all of these civil cases, and it was a civil case, it's worth reminding people of that. He was never charged with any crime. It was a civil case that would not be settled by jail time, but it would be settled by the transfer of money, and that indeed is what is happening here. I predicted even on this very channel that there would be a settlement. I didn't think it would come today. I thought the procedure would run a little bit longer, but quite clearly they want to get it. When I say they, the royal family, Buckingham Palace, and I'm sure they've had an input in this, want to get this thing out of the way so that the Platinum Jubilee celebrations and jollifications during the summer, principally in June, will go ahead without this hanging over them. But I'm afraid from Prince Andrew's point of view, this will always hang over him. This is a very bad day for him, because by making a settlement, he's no longer contesting the facts that have been alleged against him by the plaintiff in this civil case, Mrs. Giuffre, formerly Virginia Roberts, who we see in that picture there, with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. And there she is today, Mrs. Giuffre, who lives in Australia, married now with, I think, 3 children. And what she said about her relationship and her contacts with Prince Andrew a long time ago, but still very current in her mind, obviously, was very, very damaging to him. Now, in that car crash interview, which you reminded us of with Emily Maitlis, something that no PR person would ever have allowed their principal to take part in, the prince said and repeated and said again, don't know the lady, didn't happen, have no recollection of it. Now, all of that, I'm afraid, goes down the Swanee River, because now he's accepted her version of events, or else this matter would have gone to trial and to a jury, and they would have decided who was telling the truth.
Michael, I have to say I wasn't a royal correspondent for as long or for as esteemed an organisation as you were, but I remember talking to my tabloid friends in the old royal rat pack, and it was a truism to say that they felt they could say things about the royals they probably couldn't say about ordinary members of the public, politicians or business leaders, because they don't sue back. If that is true, and there's some, I suppose, evidence suggesting it's not as true as it once was, will it now be open season on Prince Andrew? Will some of those allegations that you refer to actually start to percolate out?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and your recollection is spot on. But there have been cases where Prince William and his wife, Duchess of Cambridge, did sue a French paper, a French magazine, Le Point, I believe it was called, and they succeeded. So there have been occasions when, under duress, members of the royal family have resorted to the law. Generally speaking, and they're very wise, they stay very, very clear of it. I don't believe that, well, I say open season on Prince Andrew. I think Prince Andrew, if he's wise, and I hope he is, will now keep his head down as far as possible and make himself scarce, carry on his life as privately as possible, because, not that you've asked me this question, I can't see that there's any way back to public life or any sort of royal role for him in the future. Yeah. This is quite an admission.
It is. It was obviously going to be my next question, the extent to which his reputation is recoverable at all. But before we get to that, Buckingham Palace, according to Reuters and the sources that they are speaking to, have, at this stage at least, and I stress at this stage, it may change, declined to comment on these reports from the United States. Michael Cole is a former BBC royal correspondent. I don't know whether you ever met Prince Andrew. Part of his problem is, as you say, there is a question mark about his judgment. The couple of people I've talked to who knew him a little bit, this sounds a little cruel, but it's a reflection of reality, I think. Didn't find him a winning personality. What say you?
Well, I, with your former colleague Anthony Carthew, who you remember at ITN, conducted the first interview ever with him on the day he was engaged to Sarah Ferguson, and it was judged by many people to be the most extraordinary or most forthcoming royal interview ever recorded, and it was repeated, it was reprinted in its entirety in all the newspapers at the time. And at that time, you've got to remember, he'd served with some distinction in the South Atlantic during the Falklands War. He'd come home. He was a very happy-go-lucky young man. He was a very fortunate young man. And I covered the royal wedding in 1986, and I went on their first royal tours to Canada and elsewhere. And I have to tell you, I quite liked him. I found him very much more approachable than some of the other members of the royal family, certainly his siblings. And we got on rather well. But then it all went slightly pear-shaped, as they say, because he was away in the Navy a lot, it is said. And then, of course, the marriage fell apart, which was very regrettable, because they were quite likable. I said, and I was sought out by Major Ronald Ferguson and Mrs. Susan Barantes, the parents of Sarah Ferguson, and they said, well, what can we do when this was before things were going really badly, but they were starting to come apart. And I said, well, all Sarah has to do is to love her husband, and in the next century, she and Andrew could be as popular as the Queen Mother has been in this century. And had they only done that, that could have happened. Now, as it so happens, they split apart after only 10 years of marriage. They have kept together. She even lives at Royal Lodge, Windsor, or in one part of it. And the two daughters that they have, Beatrice and Eugenie, keep them together. So I'm not going to get down on Prince Andrew because I rather liked him. It has been unfortunate. I think you're quite right when you say in recent years people have said that he's a little bit overbearing and a little bit arrogant and so on and so forth. Perhaps he has become coarsened with the years, but I think I'd prefer to think back of how he was when he got married, when he came back from the Falklands. He was a golden boy and he had the world at his feet. It's so sad to see what has happened.
No, Michael Cole, you're absolutely right. The long view is very helpful, isn't it? When you think back to that 20-something war hero with, well, I was almost going to say film star good looks. I mean, he was a bonny lad, wasn't it? And he had, as you say, the world at his feet. This is taking on the character of an obituary. He's still with us, but he's going to be with us in a very different way. I think that feels reasonable to say, doesn't it? I don't know where he can go, what he can do that keeps him out of the public spotlight sufficiently to make sure people don't make mischief for the royal family. I don't know, the middle of some estate maybe, or a farm, or maybe moving abroad. Michael Cole, we'll maybe get back to you, but I want to turn to Grant Harold, formerly royal butler, worked for the Prince of Wales for several years. Grant Harold, appreciate your time today. What would you make of this out-of-court settlement between Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew?
Good afternoon, Colin. I was quite taken aback when I heard the news just a short time ago because I believed there was going to be a court case, and I also thought it was obviously a great opportunity for the Prince, who has always said he's innocent, for him to prove his innocence. But obviously this out-of-court settlement puts an end to the whole thing. And I can only assume it's because the fact that the Queen's got also her Jubilee Platinum this year, maybe they were worried it would overshadow that as well. That's the only reason I can assume maybe this has happened.
Can we just pick up a topic I was just getting into with Michael Cole there, and that is the what comes next. I mean, assuming that Prince Andrew's reputation is irrecoverable, what do you do with a problem like Prince Andrew? Where does he go? Does he go abroad? Does he stay in the UK? Does he hunker down on a royal estate, keep out of sight of people with smartphones? What do they do with him?
This is the problem, because we've never kind of had a situation with a member of the royal family that's gone through this, and I don't think people will want to see him taking up an active public role again. I think that, especially with an out-of-court settlement, I'm assuming that he will almost retire, which is kind of already what's happened. He stood back. I see him retiring. I don't quite know what will happen going forward, because it's a difficult one. As you said, it's possible he could maybe spend time in other countries, in other parts of the world. But then again, for the last couple of years, he's kind of been over at Windsor, obviously, and out of public sight. And it's possible maybe that's what he'll continue to do. I think we'll still see him on different family occasions, very much in the background. I think that is very possible. And it's also going to be interesting, again, with the Platinum Jubilee, if he's involved in that. When I say involved in it, not taking part, but if he's there, if he's with the family, or will it be a case that you don't even see him for family get-togethers? This is going to be the answers. Hopefully we'll get the answers in the near future.
How much do you think this has weighed on the royal family and the Queen in particular?
I think this has been quite a stressful time for all of them, and particularly the Queen. I mean, it's less than a year since she lost her husband, and it's been a really difficult time for the Queen. And I think everybody's obviously talked about Prince Andrew being her favourite son. I've been asked if that's true, and I don't actually know the exact answer to that. I think she's close to all her children. But I think with Prince Andrew, obviously, there's parts of Prince Andrew that reminded her of her late husband. So there is a closeness. And I think it's very upsetting for the Queen. I think it'd be upsetting for any parent who has a child that goes through this. As we've always said, the innocent to proven guilty. But at the end of the day, parents are always going to stand by their children, quite rightly. And I think, obviously, it would have had a huge impact on her. And I think, for one, she will be glad that this hopefully comes to an end, but also she might be wondering what now is the future for him. Where does he go from this point onwards?
Grant Harold, we'll come back to you in just a second, if we may. I just want to remind our viewers and listeners as to what's happening. It's an important punctuation mark in the royal story in this country, particularly this Platinum Jubilee year. There will not now be a civil sex abuse trial in America of the Duke of York. The two parties have agreed a settlement, an undisclosed sum. Will we find out how much has been paid? Some of it, we do know, will be paid to a sex abuse charity nominated by Virginia Giuffre, who Julie Bindle, who's alongside me, knows and has talked to about this case. Julie, we don't want to get into the specifics of the case, but you feel there are lessons to be drawn, much wider lessons to be drawn, about the nature of how powerful men interact with others.
Yes, I do. And I also think that there are lessons to be learned about sex abusers in general, about men who tend to be believed almost always above the testimony, the word of girls and women. When we see how many sex crimes do result in a successful conviction. And at the moment, as I said earlier, we have, from reporting through to the end result, less than 1% conviction rate for reported rapes, which are thought to be a minority of those that occur. Now, I say this not because of ascribing any guilt or otherwise to Prince Andrew, but just to look at the culture of disbelief that permeates every single society. If we, in a democratic society with what I think is a robust criminal justice system, can produce such a tiny minority of convictions, unless 99% of those reporting rape are lying, then we have given impunity to sex offenders.
It's never that simple, isn't it? I really do not want to get into this massively sensitive territory, but, are you one of those people who feels the evidential bar needs to be lowered to secure more conviction?
Absolutely not. I'm a great believer in applying the law as it is. I do not think that we need to remove any rights from the defendant. They have the right to be innocent until proven guilty, and we should maintain the principle of justice, which I hold dear to my heart, which is that you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. However, what we need to do is look at what our criminal justice system is doing. We need to look at when the Crown Prosecution Service go through their files handed to them by police officers that see the evidence and believe the victims that have come forward, that they're just tossing the files to one side thinking, we're not going to get a conviction. The jury will question why she was drinking, why she was flirting, why she'd kissed him, whether she'd had any previous history. And this needs to change.
Let's just go back, Julie, thanks very much. And we've got you for another hour, I know, and we'll talk a lot more about this breaking news story concerning Prince Andrew. I just want to go back, if we still have Grant Harold, former royal butler to the Prince of Wales, who can just reflect not on the legal aspects that obviously royal lawyers have been looking at so closely in recent months, but on the prism through which so many members of the public will be looking at this, which is that the institution of monarchy is one that, around about 3/4 of the British public, when you poll them, still cleave to, hold dear to, feel is very important. There's a level of adoration there that remains for the Queen, and we see the latest polling on someone like Camilla, and we see her popularity rising as well. They can be forgiven for wanting this problem to go away, the Prince Andrew problem, as soon and as quietly as possible.
As you said, the popularity of the royal family has gone up over the last few years, and what they don't want, and obviously we don't want, is to see that decrease and go the other way. And so when something like this does happen, it's obviously something that they do want to, if I can say, go away. I mean, that's why he was, I use the word stripped, as it was described, stripped of these patronage, these military connections. And again, I don't see him getting any of those back either. I think, going forward, I think this is something that the royal family will almost kind of, as I said, I think he'll still appear at different family occasions, but very much as a private member of the royal family. So he'll still be there, but not taking an active or public role. And that is something that, I think that's the way forward. I think that's something that the British public, British people will be, I suppose, happy with as long as he's not got an active role. And I think that will work very much for the royal family. And let's not forget, it's been said in recent years that the royal family does want to slim down. So this only, if I can say, only helps with that plan going forward as well.
And Harold, I just wonder whether the distinction that you draw there between the private Prince Andrew present at family events and the public Prince Andrew fulfilling a public role is a distinction you understand, and people who've been part of that royal household. I wonder if it's lost on the general public.
It possibly is, because what I mean when I say the private side is, for example, at his father's funeral last year, the funeral of the late Duke of Edinburgh, you saw Prince Andrew with members of the royal family walking behind his father's coffin, but he wasn't doing that. That was as a son of that person, so that was something he wanted to do as a member of the family. And as I said, going forward with public things, that's where you see him at the forefront, or actively getting involved or doing things on that stage, which I do not think will ever happen again. But as I said, we will still see him from time to time. But I think he's going to become very much a member of the royal family that we'll see very little of. And I think he will spend quite a lot of time at Royal Lodge, which is obviously his home. I think he'll spend more time there. And as I said, there will be occasions we'll see him, but I think there'll be few and far between.
Grant Harold, former royal butler, member of the royal household. Appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. If you are just turning on, let's just remind you that there has been a court settlement involving Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre. Will not now go to civil court trial, this sex abuse case. The lawyer Lisa Bloom, who represents 8 victims of Jeffrey Epstein, the late Jeffrey Epstein, welcomed this settlement in the last hour or so as a, quote, victory for Virginia Giuffre. She wrote on Twitter, "My statements on behalf of the 8 Jeffrey Epstein victims I represent. We hail Virginia's victory today." We'll bring you much more on this breaking news story throughout the course of the next hour. We'll bring you the latest on this breaking story about Prince Andrew settling with his most prominent accuser and the backlash that may yet follow. Angela Levin will be with me, Julie Bindle too. But first, the headlines with Polly.
It's 5 o'clock, you're watching GB News, and the breaking news in the last few minutes. Prince Andrew has agreed an out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre in the civil sex abuse case against him. Court papers in the United States show the Duke of York will pay a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights. Prince Andrew has also agreed to demonstrate his regret for his association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Former head of Royal Protection Di Davis says it's an important moment for Miss Giuffre.
Where this now leaves Andrew in the court of public opinion remains to be seen. But in fairness, he has not been found guilty of anything in a court of law. So that has to be maintained and understood. What the settlement will be, I wonder what will come out, what will, as it were, escape, if anything at all.
Well, just to reiterate for you what we've been seeing in the last few moments here on GB News, it's worth reading that statement once again. Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew have reached an out-of-court settlement. The parties will file a stipulated dismissal upon Miss Giuffre's receipt of the settlement, in brackets, the sum of which is not being disclosed. Prince Andrew intends to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights. Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character, the statement says, and he accepts that she has suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks. It is known that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked countless young girls over many years. Prince Andrew regrets his association with Epstein and commends the bravery of Miss Giuffre and other survivors in standing up for themselves and others. He pledges to demonstrate his regret for his association with Epstein by supporting the fight against the evils of sex trafficking and by supporting its victims. That was the statement that accompanied the breaking news within the last few moments. It's worth also pointing out to you that Buckingham Palace have gone on record as saying they won't be making any comment on that.
Now, you may remember last month we had the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York ruled then that a civil action allegations of sexual abuse by Prince Andrew against Virginia Giuffre, who at the time was 17 years of age, in 3 separate locations in the States, in London, and in the Virgin Islands, the US Virgin Islands, could go ahead. Speculation since then that Prince Andrew, Duke of York, would contest vigorously those allegations. He still denies them to this day. But around about an hour and a half ago, maybe a little less actually, we got sight of this letter. It is to the judge in this particular case, Lewis A. Kaplan. This letter filed to the US District Court, and it lays out the terms in fairly sparse details of a settlement between the two parties. Virginia Giuffre, she's now 38, by the way. She claimed that Prince Andrew sexually assaulted her, as I say, when she was 17, which would be a crime in the United States under the jurisdiction there. And let's just remind you of what that's saying. The key elements are that there will not now be a civil case, which could have been as far away as next year, which could have resulted in significant disclosures of potential embarrassment to the institution of monarchy and other public figures, potentially as well. That will not now happen. There will be a sum of money given to a charity, a sex abuse charity of Virginia Giuffre's choice. Let's turn to Angela Levin, the royal writer, who has talked to me about the story on many occasions. And Angela, I think it's probably fair to say that you thought this was likely, and I suppose it's soon enough to present it being a major embarrassment to the royals as they prepare to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, or is it just what it looks like, which is a lingering embarrassment for years to come?
No, I think it sounds remarkably humble, which is not something that we expect from Prince Andrew. Why that is, I'm not sure, but I wonder if the Queen, now she's well, gave him a bollocking and said, "You're not going to spoil my Platinum Jubilee. I'm the only person who's ever reached this, and you've just got to sort it out. I don't want salacious things happening when I'm trying to enjoy myself as during the Jubilee." She's the only one, I think, who should really give him a telling off. She's very matronly with him, and perhaps he decided that. But it is a great relief, I think, because it would have rumbled on and that would have taken the headlines all the time. And goodness knows what could have come out at the other end. But I think that it's good on from both sides, because Virginia's got what she wanted, really. She wanted to be paid properly, but we hear it's going to a charity of her choice. So she can't be chosen, really, or can't be thought of as somebody who's just after the money for herself. I think that's quite significant. And hopefully, at the end of a month, this will all go away. It does not mean, however, that he will be embraced by the royal family and we will see him during the Jubilee celebrations. I think he's going to have to learn to live quietly and modestly, but that's probably better than going to High Court. I also think that he called Virginia's bluff, because her lawyers have said that she only wanted to go to court and she wasn't interested in the money. But actually, at the last moment, they said, well, she might be interested in the money. So I think it's a combination of compromise on both sides, which I think is a very good sign.
Angela, will you just hold that thought for a second? Julie Bindel is alongside me, feminist writer, a campaigner, and sometime friend of Virginia Giuffre as well.
No, but we have had contact because of the work that I do to end sexual exploitation, and of course she's part of that picture.
Anyway, I introduced you because you raised your eyebrows a little bit when Angela's mentioned money.
I did. What Virginia Giuffre actually wanted was for a court of law to hear the evidence and for a jury to decide on guilt or otherwise. That is what she has pushed for. That's what she has spent all of these years doing. Remember.
So why she settled?
Well, this is a complicated set of circumstances. Obviously, she took the civil case because she wanted certain facts as she would see them, and she obviously had evidence. And we've seen evidence, of course. We've seen photographic evidence that Prince Andrew was with her, knew her at least, which he denied. And we also know that he chose to maintain his friendship with the child trafficker and rapist Jeffrey Epstein after he'd served time in prison. So we know that there would have been evidence to come out at a civil trial, and this is what she wanted. Now, to make a settlement agreement, it has to be that she accepts that this is at least something different from Prince Andrew calling her a liar, defaming her, and that this is something that she possibly felt she could do for the good of other victims. And maybe after 21 years of fighting this battle, she considered herself to be maybe not robust enough to go through another 2 years of this and face those consequences, because in defamation cases, it's always extremely risky. You know, you can have a judgment against you, and it's the last thing that you're expecting.
Angela Levin, you want to come back in?
Well, yes, I agree a lot with that. I think poor woman, she doesn't want to face very powerful lawyers who are going to try and make mincemeat out of her to get Andrew off the hook. And I don't blame her for feeling that it was just too much. I don't put any blame on her at all, actually, but it was a way of dealing with it that seems very reasonable from both sides. No one is attacking either person. They're just trying to come to some sort of compromise. And I think that really sounds what is sensible to do.
You say that, Angela. I'm just reading the letter again, and we'll try and put up a truncated version of it so our viewers can look at it too. And apologies if you're listening on radio. I'll try and pass it for you. But as I read, let me read it, and then I'll get you both to come back in. Virginia Giuffre and Prince Andrew have reached an out-of-court settlement, that we know. The parties will file a stipulated dismissal upon Miss Giuffre's receipt of the settlement, the sum of which is not being disclosed. In other words, you may never find out how much money has been paid to settle this. Prince Andrew intends to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity in support of victims' rights. Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character, and he accepts that she has suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks. It is known that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked countless young girls over many years. I mean, that will seem like a statement of fact to some people, but to hear it as part of the settlement agreement is quite a statement. Prince Andrew regrets his association with Epstein, which he hasn't always done, and commends the bravery of Miss Giuffre and other survivors, the use of the word survivors, in standing up for themselves and others. He pledges to demonstrate his regret for his association with Epstein by supporting the fight against the evils of sex trafficking and by supporting its victims. Angela, I wanted to read it in full because, you know, you are an historian of the royal family as an institution. These documents stay on the public record. This is now an historic document. And whichever way you cut it, however you pass those words, they are, I'm not going to use the word incriminating for obvious legal reasons, but in terms of the court of public opinion and the prism through which people look at the royal family, those are pretty damning words.
I think they're very damning words. I mean, it's a bit late in the day, isn't it, to apologise for knowing Jeffrey Epstein when he knew many years ago, 2002, even before that he was accused of having relations with underage girls and sexual trafficking. So it doesn't do him the world of good, but I think we're thinking in degrees now. What's the best thing you can come out of it? I mean, he's never going to be welcomed back into the royal family in the same way. And this is why he was ludicrously stupid to befriend him. And he obviously knew some things that were going on. And I think that he will never live it down, but it's better than actually going through a court case and people asking extremely personal sexual questions of him.
Angela, I hope you can stay with us because I'm really keen to get into to what extent his reputation is recoverable and actually just practically how he leads the rest of his life at the age of 61. He may have many decades ahead of him. But if you just hang on for a wee while, I want to introduce our viewers and listeners to the lawyer Lisa Bloom, who has represented 8 of those alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who joins us now, I think from the United States. Lisa Bloom, welcome to you. I'm guessing you're pleased today with this. Well, I assume you're pleased with the settlement. Perhaps you would have preferred to see it go to court. I don't know.
My clients and I hail Virginia's victory today, and that's what this is, because she was able to accomplish what nobody else has. That is to get Prince Andrew to stand squarely with victims of sex trafficking and sexual abuse, to make a significant contribution to her charity, which will help other victims in cases that don't get media coverage, where celebrities aren't involved, but where many women are still suffering. And I represent dozens and dozens of victims of sexual abuse today. So she gets to decide when her case ends. She has decided that now is the time. I'm sure she wants to move on with her life. These cases are extraordinarily painful, and we have nothing but respect and admiration for Virginia.
Lisa, just from a lawyer's perspective, I was reading to our viewers and listeners that statement that's been issued today and trying to interrogate what the meaning of the words that it contains. That has not just been cobbled together in the course of a meeting over a cup of coffee on the back of an envelope. How much work goes into that? How much compromise? I mean, there's nothing in it which overtly says on Prince Andrew's part, I persist in maintaining my innocence. I suppose that is a given. How much work?
It's a huge amount of work. I negotiate these every day. I was on the phone yesterday in a similar case, negotiating every word. So every word that you are reading, the attorneys went back and forth over, probably chose different words. Something was taken out. I mean, look, the last part of the statement where he says that he acknowledges that Jeffrey Epstein, abused a lot of people. Don't we already know that? And Prince Andrew says that he stands with victims of sex trafficking. I mean, is that really taking a controversial stand? Don't most people stand with the victims? But yet he hasn't done that so far. So that is a victory, I think, for Virginia. And I'm sure that there's not a confidentiality clause, meaning that she is still free to tell her story. And I hope that she does, because she's been a terrific advocate for victims.
Oh, that's interesting. Ears are pricking up in newsrooms throughout the weekend's newspapers here, I'm sure, at that thought. Which rather preempts my next question, Lisa Bloom, which is legally, is this where the matter now rests?
Yes, it's over. The parties in a civil case can decide, and these two sides have made this decision, that they can settle the case whenever they want to. 95% of cases end this way. It may seem frustrating to outsiders who wanted to see depositions and a trial, but this is the decision that both sides have made, and it is now over.
Interest in this country obviously is focused on Prince Andrew, but in terms of what Jeffrey Epstein facilitated and personally did, it's a much broader scope in terms of the investigation, in terms of the number of alleged victims involved. What about their cases? Where do they go from here?
Well, in my 8 cases, we won all of them against Jeffrey Epstein's estate. And so my clients have gotten significant compensation in all 8, and their cases are done. I think other attorneys have cases that are still going on. Some of them did not win. Those victims are continuing to litigate against the estate. So we'll just have to watch and see what happens there.
Lisa, I know you need to move on, but just one final question, and I come back to the point you make that there may be no gagging order within the context of this court settlement. So it's your understanding that she is still at liberty, Virginia Giuffre, to give her side of the story, her version of events, with no ensuing legal penalty?
That's correct. I don't see anything in this settlement that would have an NDA, and I'd be very surprised if Virginia would agree to that.
That's absolutely fascinating. Okay, Lisa Bloom, I really appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Let's just go back to Angela Levin for her thoughts on that, and in particular, Angela, the fact that there is no non-disclosure agreement so far as we can tell. So the bomb's not gone off, but it's still packed with explosives.
Absolutely. I got quite a shock there. I thought that was the end, actually meant the end. But to think that she can write her whole story in great detail is quite disturbing. I'm not saying I don't blame her, because she might want to get it all out, but I think that will affect the monarchy very seriously as well, perhaps almost as bad as if he went to court.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, at least allegations would be tested in court, wouldn't they? Whereas within a book, it will be lawyered, and the lawyers will say, we need to be conscious of defamation and libel, but actually you can push it this far, you can say it in this way. There are ways you can say things without saying them quite so bluntly.
Yes, I don't think Andrew's out of the wood yet. I thought he probably was, and things would calm down and he could spend a quiet rest of his life. But it doesn't look like that if she really wants to write her life story. If she does a book, that will be very difficult for all the royal family, I think, particularly for Andrew.
And Angela, just leaving aside whether there may be further disclosures, but just in terms of how he spends the rest of his life, we've talked about this before, and what strategy could be adopted. Could he go abroad? Could he stay in the UK, but make sure he was out of range of smartphones or long lenses? He's 61. He's not always, it's certainly been your understanding, I think, that he's not always gone along with all the advice and guidance he gets from palace advisors. He likes to make his own decisions. He might decide that he's in the clear because of this settlement today. He persists in maintaining his innocence. No court has found against him. He might be lobbying as we speak for the restoration of his royal titles and military associations. If he is, what would you say to the palace? What should they say to him?
Well, I don't think he will. I mean, Prince Charles has told him very, very clearly that he has to become invisible and not be seen at any time, anything to do with the royals. He might disagree with him, but I think he probably realises that the Queen relies very much on Prince Charles and Prince William to make these decisions now. So although I believe still that she told him to actually, give in and sort it out, come to some sort of compromise, I don't think she will fight very hard for him to come back. And she's always been very supportive of him, but he pushed the barrier too far. I think he'll have a very quiet, boring life, frankly. He won't be able to go abroad very much because it will be quite embarrassing. It will, everybody would watch him. I don't think that that's a good idea. He can ride the horses and stay at home very quietly, watch lots of television. I know that sounds pathetic, but, I can't see how he can come back and suddenly realise that he's going to represent army people and have a few more engagements as a royal. I don't think that's going to happen at all.
No, that just feels true, doesn't it? Angela Levin, we appreciate your time. I know you've probably got some copy to file, so we do appreciate it. Thanks ever so much. Just seeing a line from Penny Junor, another well-known royal writer, who says that at last Prince Andrew is expressing some empathy and regret for those girls. He got it right now in the statement that's been issued. It took him a long time to get there, but I think he's got it right. She was asked if there was a way back to public royal life for Prince Andrew. The question I just put to Angela Levin, she said, I think it is very, very unlikely. What does Michael Cole make of it all, whether there is any way back for Prince Andrew, former BBC royal correspondent over the years? Michael, thanks for your time, appreciate it. We'll come on, if we can, in a moment to the question of what he does next, but we just had an extraordinary thought from a lawyer who's represented some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, who said that this court settlement does not prevent Virginia Giuffre, from telling her side of the story, whether that's in syndicated news articles or a TV interview or in a book.
I think it's an absolute odds-on certainty that that's what she will do. I think we'll see books, we'll see articles, how the rights will be brought up. I mean, this is a hands-down victory for Virginia Giuffre. The proof of that is that there's money going, and it's only going in one direction. It's going from Prince Andrew towards Miss Giuffre, and also towards a charity. I don't know the name of it or what specification it is, but there is this charity. And that's going to cost Prince Andrew a lot of money. And it couldn't have been clearer. That's what the lawyers call damages, i.e. cash. And that couldn't make the situation more clear as day, that what has happened here. It's pretty abject, and as Penny Junor was saying, he expresses regret. In fact, he expresses regret twice, the word is used, and also says that he regrets that as a victim of abuse, she was also subject to unfair attacks. So it's pretty comprehensive. It's probably the right thing to have done in order to have tried to staunch the flow of very, very damaging stories. But as your other interviewees have said, there's no way back. There cannot be any way back, because by settling this case, when he said that he didn't know the woman, hadn't met the woman, couldn't understand why he was being accused, having said he was going to challenge it and defend himself, now this settlement means that it's an admission that these charges were valid and truthful.
Michael Cole is that dreadful word that people now use to describe how they're going to pick up lessons from what's happened. They say there are learnings. Well, if there are learnings for the royal household, for the royal family, for the institution of monarchy from this, I wonder what they are. This is an institution which likes to think of itself as a bit like the Vatican. It thinks decades, even hundreds of years into the future. There's a question. How do you stop a member of a family? There are good princes and bad princes. That's been true for 1,000 years. How do you stop something like this happening again?
Well, not too long ago, people were brought up rightly, properly. There was a sense of decency. People didn't need to have lessons. They actually knew because of the way they were brought up and the manner that they were taught, and by following what their fathers and their uncles did, and they didn't abuse women and they didn't act in that particular way. It was called chivalry. That's what we used to do. Women were respected as they should be. There shouldn't be any need for any of this, but it has happened. Apparently it has happened, and certainly it is not being challenged anymore because there has been a settlement of this civil case in the manner which has been described this evening. And it's a bad day for Prince Andrew. It's a bad day for the monarchy, but this is probably the very best solution that could have been arrived at this particular time, because it does hopefully clear the matter away, at least for a while, in order the country and the Commonwealth can concentrate on the celebrations of the Queen's amazing Platinum Jubilee, principally in the summer, but throughout the year. However, I'm afraid there will be ramifications from this. There'll be a deluge of bad publicity tomorrow in the newspapers, and it will go on for some time. And as you said, Colin, at the beginning when we discussed this, there will be, in all probability, publishing rights, articles, television programs, and they will go over the whole thing again. And Prince Andrew will not be able to stand there and say, no, it didn't happen, which is what he did say to Emily Maitlis. Said, never met the woman, cannot understand it, etc., etc.
Yeah, I hope we're bashing the phones right now to try and speak to a lawyer who can tell us what efforts were made by Prince Andrew's, or likely to be made by Prince Andrew's legal team, to try and get a non-disclosure agreement in it. It does, well, to describe it as an oversight doesn't do it justice. I'm guessing they strove for it, just couldn't get it. Look, Michael Cole, we'll say thanks for now. I just want to turn, before we go to the news bulletin, back to Julie Bindel, who's been patiently alongside me throughout the last hour and a half or so, reflecting on this story and no others, because it is the big breaking story today. You wince slightly at the thought that men have always been chivalrous.
Well, I'd love to think that by raising our boys to be chivalrous and well-mannered, means that there's an end to rape and sexual assault, domestic violence and femicide. 1 woman every 3 days is killed by a partner or ex-partner. There are thousands upon thousands of rapes and sexual assaults, many of them committed by men who are chivalrous, well-mannered, completely blend into society. It's not about that. I'm sorry to have to say, I completely disagree with Michael Cole that there was this time in the past, this romanticised, distant past, where women and girls were not harmed because everybody was raised properly. Ever since women began speaking out, ever since women's history was recorded, there has been testimony about men committing such acts with impunity, not because they're programmed to do so, but because they get away with it. We need a workable criminal justice system. And I would like to see, in Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial, I would like to see her naming every single man that paid to abuse the girls trafficked by Epstein. That's what I would like to see. And I think that there's many powerful, rich men shaking like a leaf right now at the prospect of that. We need those men to meet justice.
Julie, more on that in a wee while. And we're also going to be talking to Charles Ray, formerly of The Sun and elsewhere besides, royal watcher, royal writer of many years, very distinguished observer of royal matters, who'll be joining us very soon. In the meantime, Polly has the headlines.